All right, welcome back. Section 2, Part 2. We were talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. We were talking about how Stephen Douglas wanted to get this law passed to help his own state. Bit of a sellout. The Northerners felt like this was a complete betrayal because Kansas and Nebraska were both, if you look here, part of what would have been considered Northern Territory, and they would have been free states. The Kansas-Nebraska Act gave them the opportunity to vote on whether they want to be slave or free. And it's, by the way, if this became how we decided things, that means all of that territory had the opportunity to become free or slave, when the truth was most of the territory probably naturally would have been free, especially now that northern states had those two senators from California that could now pass the Wilmot Proviso and make it so no slaves could be out west. So this was a complete betrayal of everything the Northerners believed in, and Stephen Douglas was he was from out west, but he was from a free state. After a lot of debate, they actually passed the law, and Stephen Douglas, who pulled a lot of strings to get it through, truly and honestly believed this would put an end to the slavery debate forever. This will become how we do things. What we'll just do is we'll take the West, we'll make like 7 territories out of it, 7 huge territories. Each territory can just decide on themselves if they want to be slave or free, and then we'll never have to talk about this topic again. And man, was he wrong. So that was the theory, but let's see what actually happens in Kansas. And here's a hint. Come on. Eventually, this slide's going to change. There we go. It's called Bleeding Kansas. Not going to go well. So they set a date for them to vote in Kansas on whether they wanted to be slave or free. And from the date they set the date until the date itself, people just flooded into Kansas. Rich Southerners paid the way for people to go live in Kansas and vote for slavery. Rich Northerners paid people to move out west into the Kansas Territory and vote against slavery. Abolitionists who really just wanted it to be free just went there. They didn't even move there. They went there just to throw the vote. Southerners who owned slaves, when they wanted to turn it slave and maybe be able to import their slaves in there, went there just to be able to throw the vote. They didn't even buy a house. They just lived. They just went there and stayed in a motel for a while. And what you had was just an absolute mess. And in the long run, the slave side, the pro-slave side is going to win. But you had lots of non-Kansans go flooding in order to kind of throw the vote. As a matter of fact, the vote was so illegitimate that 3,000 people were registered to vote. So the maximum number of votes there could be would be 3,000 people. And in actuality, there were 8,000 votes. So that's 5,000 votes that don't count, either because they're people that didn't live in Kansas and therefore shouldn't be allowed to vote, or they're Kansans or others voting twice. I'm going to vote in my hometown, then I'm going to ride to the next town, and I'm going to vote there, then I'm going to ride to the next town, and I'm going to vote there. Either way, the side that managed to rig the election the best was the pro-slavery side, and the result of the completely illegitimate election was that Kansas was set up to become a slave state. And of course, the anti-slave side said, you can't seriously count that election. And the pro-slavery said, I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody voted. The writing's on the wall. Everybody knows it's now a slave. So the anti-slavery people simply said, we're going to hold a second election. After all these people who don't belong here go home because they can't afford to live here forever, after all those people go home, we'll hold a second election. And when they did that, of course, the pro-slavery people didn't participate because they said the first election counted. So then, of course, the anti-slavery people overwhelmingly won the election that only they participated in. And then they went and set up their own government. So now there were actually 2 governments in Kansas. Both did not recognize the legitimacy of the other one. Both said that the other one's, just lying about everything. Both said the other one was only elected in an illegitimate election. And by the way, they were both correct. Both of them won an illegitimate election. So we end up with 2 governments. Both of them set up militias, These militias are not much more than gangs of guys running around shooting at things. Both of them send people to like harass and attack the other side. And we get like, I don't know, 5 or 6 dozen people die in Kansas being attacked, just randomly by members from another town that town was pro-slave. I mean, you didn't even have to be pro-slave to live in a town that was pro-slave. You could just be living there, and the anti-slave people would come attack you, or the pro-slave would come attack the anti-town, and then there'd be, like a vendetta and revenge, and people just were dying left and right. And what the government learned is you can't just let people vote on it, or if you do, there has to be some controls. In today's world, we have voter registration, and we got driver's licenses, and you have to register as a voter, and you have to prove that you belong in that precinct and all that kind of stuff. They didn't have any of that stuff back then. They didn't even have cameras to take your picture. So anybody could vote anywhere. And it just got super ugly. There were ambushes, raids, open attacks, people being attacked on the roads, people riding through towns shooting at everything they could see. And it was all to try and like scare the other side out of the state. Terrible, terrible ridiculousness. And in the next section, we're going to talk about John Brown. John Brown is going to see Bleeding Kansas, and he's going to act even weirder. Sooner or later, we end up with fighting all across Kansas. And like I said, dozens of people dying and hundreds of people shot and injured. They gave it the nickname Bleeding Kansas because what was supposed to be democracy turned very quickly into mob rule and rioting. Matter of fact, the pro and anti-slavery stuff got so bad that as a result of Bleeding Kansas, a senator from the North gave a huge speech in Congress. His name's Charles Sumner. He wanted to get rid of slavery. He's in the Senate, and he gives a speech about how the Southerners will do anything to perpetuate slavery. They'll shoot innocent women and children. They'll come north and steal, free men and force them into slavery. That part's true. And he said, in particular, the South Carolinians and a guy named Andrew Butler is the worst of the bunch. Andrew Butler was a fellow senator. And then Andrew Butler's nephew, also a senator, gets mad and goes into Charles Sumner's office and beats him nearly to death with his cane, just starts clubbing the guy and almost kills him. And, of course, you would think people would be outraged that, a person's attacking a senator for what he said in the Senate. I mean, your job in the Senate is to argue for things. And as far as we know, this is the only time a senator's beat up another senator, that we know of. So rather than being outraged, and this shows you how far the country's come in the 1850s, a bunch of Southerners continued to present Preston Brooks with canes in their support for him. Everywhere he went, people would present him with a cane, or they'd send him a cane to say, like, we're with you. I wish you'd beat all of them up. And I mean, it seems a little childish, and it's kind of a scary but cute little story in American history, but it does show you that we're quickly going beyond the level of repair. We're not going to be able to fix the country. We're just pulling too far apart. And Bleeding Kansas and Charles Sumner are kind of some of the last examples of how we're beyond reconciliation at this part. All right, I'm going to send you Section 3 in just a little bit here, but that should get you completely done with Section 2. Feel free to get that study guide done. Email me if you have any questions.